In the springs of 2003, I sat in a navigation theory class, and the instructor put up a single radar screen. 2 blips 20 miles apart, closing on each other. He asked the class what the right move was. 19 out of 20 students said the same thing. Turn to port, create more separation. He said no. That is how the Andrea Doria sank. Then he did not explain further. He just moved on to the next slide, which I always thought was either a masterclass in dramatic timing or a sign he had somewhere else to be. The answer to that radar problem and the actual reason the Andrea Doria went down are not the same thing. The correct rule was clear. Both ships had radar. The night was calm, and 51 people died anyway. Not because of a storm, not because of a rogue wave, not because of mechanical failure, but because 2 vessels, fully equipped with every available technology, turned in exactly the wrong direction at exactly the wrong moment. And both of them were technically following their own logic. That is what this video is about. On the evening of July 25, 1956, the SS Andrea Doria was approaching the end of her return voyage from Genoa to New York. She was a flagship, 44,000 tons, 697 feet long, the pride of the Italian line. She was carrying more than 1,700 people. Her captain was Piero Calami, 41 years with the Italian Merchant Marine, a man who had navigated U-boat zones in the war. The MS Stockholm was heading the other way, eastbound from New York toward Gothenburg. She was about half the size of the Doria, and she sailed under the Swedish flag. Her captain, Gunnar Nordenson, had gone off watch around 9 p.m. and left the bridge to a 26-year-old third officer named Ernst Carstens Johansson. Both ships were running at speed. The Doria was making about 21 knots through fog, dense, patchy fog that had been building since early evening. The Stockholm was making about 18 knots heading into it. Both ships had radar. This is important because radar had only been commercially fitted to merchant vessels for a few years. It was new, it was trusted, and almost nobody using it had been formally trained on what it actually told you, and more importantly, what it did not. Here is the core problem, and it is more subtle than it looks. The radar technology available in 1956 was relative motion radar. That means you see a blip moving on a screen, but the movement of that blip is relative to your own ship heading, not to true north and not to actual geography. If you are moving, the blip is moving relative to you. To figure out where another ship is actually going, its real course and speed, you have to manually plot multiple positions over time, calculate the vector, and do the math. In fog, in the dark, while also navigating. The Doria's watch officers tracked the Stockholm at 17 miles and plotted a course that appeared to show the Stockholm roughly 2 miles to their port side. A port-to-port passing was normal, and the gap seemed adequate. As the distance closed, the blip shifted. To the Doria's officers, it now looked like the Stockholm was going to pass uncomfortably close, possibly even cutting across to the starboard side. Captain Calami ordered a course change to port. Left 4 degrees at first, then another 20 degrees. His intention was to create more sea room and to swing the contact to the right. On the Stockholm, Carstens was watching a blip at 12 miles. His plot showed the Doria slightly to his port side, and he calculated a passing distance of roughly 1 nautical mile, safe by the standards of the day. He made a small course adjustment to starboard to open the gap a little more. What neither bridge knew was that both corrections were feeding the same convergence. The Doria turned left into the Stockholm's path. The Stockholm turned right into the Doria's path. Two ships, each acting on internally consistent but incompatible readings of the same situation, were heading directly toward each other at a combined closing speed of about 40 knots. At 40 knots combined, 1 nautical mile takes 90 seconds. The international regulations for preventing collisions at sea, the version in force in 1956, required vessels in fog to proceed at a moderate speed. Not a speed at which radar looks comfortable, a speed at which, if your radar is wrong, you can still stop or maneuver before a collision becomes inevitable. The Doria was making 21 knots. The Stockholm was making 18 knots. Neither was moderate. The regulations also required fog signals, whistle blasts at regular intervals. Evidence at the subsequent inquiry suggested neither crew heard the other's signals before impact. At those speeds, in patchy fog, they probably could not have. There is a concept in navigation called radar-assisted collision. It sounds like a contradiction, but it is a documented phenomenon. Radar gives you confidence. You can see other ships at 17 miles, 10 miles, 5 miles. You feel like you have complete situational awareness, so you maintain speed. You do not post extra lookouts. You trust the screen. And the screen, as I have just described, was showing you relative motion, which you were misinterpreting, because relative motion radar without proper plotting technique will tell you a calm and coherent lie right up until the moment the information becomes irrelevant. At 11:10 in the evening on July 25th, the Stockholm's bow, reinforced for Baltic ice operations, struck the Andrea Doria on her starboard side, approximately 1/3 from the bow. The Stockholm punched about 40 feet into the Doria's hull. Her own bow crumpled back 30 feet. The Doria began listing immediately, not gradually. Within minutes, she was over 18 degrees to starboard. Here's why it happened that fast. The Andrea Doria was at the end of a transatlantic crossing. Her fuel tanks, full leaving Genoa, were now mostly empty. The correct procedure was to fill those emptying tanks with seawater ballast as fuel was consumed to maintain stability. Evidence at the inquiry suggested this had not been done fully or consistently. An empty fuel tank is a large void space below the waterline. Leave it empty or fill it unevenly, and you reduce the ship's metacentric height, its resistance to rolling. The lower the metacentric height, the more sensitive the hull is to off-center flooding. The collision flooded multiple compartments on the starboard side. The empty starboard fuel tanks made the list worse and faster than the naval architect's original damage stability calculations had assumed. The Doria's watertight compartments worked. They just could not overcome the combination of collision damage and the ballast shortfall at the same time. That list created a second failure that killed people who might otherwise have survived. The Doria carried enough lifeboats for all her passengers, but they were split evenly on both sides. With a 20+ degree list to starboard, the port side lifeboats swung inward over the deck. They could not be launched. Only the starboard boats were accessible. She had usable lifeboat capacity for roughly half her complement. 46 people died on the Doria, most of them killed in the collision itself, in the section of the ship that was directly struck. 5 crew members died on the Stockholm. The total was 51. The Doria sank at 10:29 a.m. on July 26th. That was 11 hours after impact. Both companies settled out of court before the liability case could be heard. The Doria's deck log, the official navigation record, was never produced at the inquiry. The Italian line said it had gone down with the ship. The Stockholm's third officer was initially assigned significant blame, then largely cleared. Captain Calami spent the rest of his life believing he bore personal responsibility for the loss. Formal investigations in both the United States and Sweden reached the same basic conclusion. Both ships were going too fast in fog. Both crews misread the radar, and both made course corrections that accelerated the collision rather than preventing it. The international regulations for preventing collisions at sea were revised in the years that followed. The idea of radar-assisted collision became a recognized hazard in maritime law, a category of accident caused not by lack of technology, but by misplaced trust in it. In 1972, a completely revised set of collision regulations came into force. The COLREGs we use today included explicit, unambiguous language on safe speed in restricted visibility. The rules did not say, radar shows enough clearance. They said speed must be such that you can take effective action to avoid a collision and stop within a distance appropriate to the actual conditions you are operating in. That language took 16 years to make it into international law after the Andrea Doria sank. Back to that instructor's radar screen. 2 blips, 20 miles apart, closing in fog. 19 students turned to port. One, and not me to claim credit, gave the correct answer. Before you turn anywhere, you slow down, you reassess, and you do not treat the relative motion of a blip on a screen as ground truth. The Andrea Doria had the best radar money could buy in 1956. She had experienced officers. She had a captain with 4 decades at sea. She had rules that told her to slow down in fog, and she did not follow them, not because the crew were reckless, but because the technology had built a new kind of confidence that the regulations had not yet learned to distrust. That was the gap, not between the ships, but between what the radar was showing and what the radar actually meant. 51 people were crossing the Atlantic on a July night and did not make it to New York because 2 bridges, each looking at the same 2 blips, drew incompatible conclusions and turned in exactly the directions that guaranteed they would meet. The rules existed. The radar existed. The problem was the speed, and it took 16 years to write that into law.